I don't know that I've ever seen a more divisive and yet like somewhat well-known device than the Pixel Fold. Depending on who you ask, this device is one of the best phones they've ever owned, one of the best devices released in this last calendar year, or it is one of the biggest flops, one of the biggest disappointments, a terrible device that came out this last year. One of the biggest disappointments that came out last year would maybe be a better way to say that. So I thought I would try to get to the bottom of this situation by running a couple of polls asking people to rate two different things. One, I wanted people who did not own the device to rate their perception of the device. And then two, I wanted people who actually owned it to rate their real world experience. And at first blush, the results seemed somewhat uninteresting. But as I dug in, I found that there actually is a lot here to talk about. So rather than starting with the poll results, we're going to kind of shift things and flip them around. And we're going to go over some of the comments that were left first. And you'll understand why I'm doing it this way as we go through the video. So let's first talk about the people who did not buy the Pixel Fold and why they said that they didn't. Now, I want to point out something immediately. There were a lot of answers. There were several different reasons. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different reasons listed in, I think it was like 30 something comments or something like that. Now, there were 3 or 4 comments though that got repeated several times, and those are the ones that we're going to focus on. So comment number 1 is the Pixel Fold is simply too expensive. And yes, it did launch at $1,800. It's been on sale for $1,449 for much of the last month. But yes, indeed, that is still very, very expensive. And I think that is a totally fair criticism you could levy against all foldable phones. They are all very, very expensive. But that sort of leads into the most common comment that was left, which is that it runs the Tensor G2. It's too expensive because it runs Tensor G2, or simply, I don't want to own it because it runs the Tensor G2. This processor has a very bad reputation. People think it is extremely slow, underpowered, and it does not belong in a flagship device because of this. Now, of course, I've made extensive videos on this. In fact, I just posted one comparing the OnePlus Open to the Pixel Fold and comparing their raw speed in normal day-to-day usage. And the results, I think, were quite clear. For 95% of people, 95% of the time, and yes, 70% of statistics are made up on the spot, the Tensor G2 and the Pixel Fold is going to hold up just fine, okay? Launching normal apps, moving through normal applications, it is extremely smooth. The only places where it's really going to show that it lags behind is with gaming, which, and it can still do some gaming, right? But if you're like really pushing, you're trying to like do Nintendo Switch emulation, things like that, it's going to lag behind these, Snapdragon processors. Absolutely fair. Benchmarks are going to bear that out. Gaming is a weak point for that processor. And then with the newest ones, in certain situations, video processing can lag behind as well. But again, most people aren't doing hardcore gaming. Most people aren't processing 4K video on their phones with a video editor. It's going to be just fine. And yet there is a very strong perception of problems with the Tensor G2. They also think that it overheats all the time. It gets a little bit warm, but I've demonstrated this as well. A little bit warm. We're talking about 5 degrees warmer here or there in my experience, and we're not talking about overheating. We're just talking about picking up your phone and thinking, it feels a little warm. But some people are bothered by these things, right? Some people think if I'm spending $1,800, I want the fastest possible device. And I get that. I get where you're coming from. I also saw from a couple of people that they felt like the software was not well optimized. At first, I was like, I'm not really sure what you mean, but then I kind of thought a bit deeper about it. There are a few things that are definitely problems. So if you're coming from another folding device and you hear that it does not have app pairs or floating windows, yeah, that is absolutely a valid concern to have, and it's something that frustrates me at times, and I can absolutely see where it would frustrate you. Now, some people were saying the fact that apps do not resize, you have pillar boxing is a problem, and I think maybe they're just kind of behind a little bit. Maybe they don't realize with the recent update that has been fixed. So the software is becoming more and more optimized for this form factor. We are still waiting for app pairs and for floating windows, which is totally a valid concern. The last comment that was left multiple times was that it lacked pin support. There is no Pixel pin for the Fold. And for some people, that kind of makes them go towards the One Plus device because there is an Oppo Pen, or of course the Z Fold because there is an S Pen. Now, when we flip things around and we talk about the people who did buy it, what did they have to say? Well, like I alluded to, they had fewer things to say. Most of the comments simply said something like, I really like the Pixel Fold. I enjoy the Pixel Fold. Very kind of broad statements of, I like it, 4 out of 5, or I like it, whatever. But there were some comments, some particular things that did rise to the surface, and the most popular comment was regarding the size, the aspect ratio, just the general form factor of the device. That is the biggest thing for most people who love the Pixel Fold. They feel like they have a mini phone that can also be a tablet. And like I've said multiple times, and actually some of you repeated this back to me, it's like having two devices. I would love to just carry a tablet with me wherever I go. It's nice to have a tablet, but they're big. But with this, you have a mini phone. I am of the opinion that phones have gotten entirely too large, entirely too tall. This is not that. This is what I wish that this is just the shape that all phones were personally. It's not too tall. It's just a good shape for a phone. But it's also a tablet. So if I need a tablet, I can open the thing up and I have a much larger, device there in my pocket. And you guys repeated that over and over. Size, aspect ratio, like having two devices. You also called out the cameras. A lot of you really love the Pixel cameras. We'll talk about this in another video later on once the official video from MKBHD is released. But I'm hearing that in his blind camera test that he does every year, that the Pixel Fold apparently performed extremely well. That does not surprise me at all. I don't think it's the best camera on a foldable, but I think it's very, very good, and you guys seem to really dig the camera. And the last thing that's obvious to me as well are the Pixel features, right? So typing's better, voice typing's better, call screening, hold for me, now playing, magic eraser, the recorder, on and on and on and on and on. The Pixels just have this fantastic suite of software, and the overall look, feel, performance of the software you guys also seem to really like. But here's something I want you guys to think about. If I simply took the comments from the people that said they liked the device, and they were sort of nebulous, they were mostly broad statements, and then I took the comments from people that said they didn't buy the device, and I jumbled them all up, and I presented them to you, and you read through them, your perception would be that most people seem to dislike this device, seem to think it was a bad device. But we have to keep something really important in mind. We have to keep in mind the way that we actually talk about things. This is just part of human psychology. We tend to have much more to say about negative things than we do positive things. There is this bias towards saying negative things. And again, it's much easier to pick something apart than it is to build it up. And that is kind of borne out here. And I want to now take the opportunity to turn to the actual poll results. So these are the results from people that did not buy the device. 312 votes and 3 out of 5 won. Now let's give the rubric here. 1 out of 5. 5 meaning it seems like the most amazing phone ever, and 1 meaning it looks like it is essentially unusable. Very few people voted for 1. Very few people voted for 2. Most people voted 3 or 4, which in my mind would mean somewhere between it looks pretty good to it looks pretty great. Because 5, the greatest phone imaginable, most people are never going to vote for that. So 3 and 4, that's a pretty strong result. And yet there were a whole bunch of comments that were, calling out a whole bunch of different negative things. And again, that would skew your perception. Let's look at the people that actually own the device, though. Exact same rubric, 189 votes. And on this one, the results are very similar. Not a lot of people voted for 1. Not a lot of people voted for 2. But 3, 4, and 5 are the winners. 3 won. But as you can see, 4 does make up some ground, where most people that didn't own it were like, it seems okay. It seems like it's a decent phone. People that bought it leaned, yes, towards 3, but a little bit more towards 4, a little bit more towards, hey, this is actually a great device, even though if you just went to the comment section, you might not get that perception because, again, they just didn't have a whole lot to say. It was like, I like the shape, I like the Pixel software, I like the camera, see you later. That was pretty much all that anyone had to say about it. And yet, by and large, people kind of like the device quite a bit. When it comes to this stuff, it's easy to look at these sorts of things of like, here are the 8 complaints, here are the 3 or 4 things that people really liked. And I'm lumping some things together. You could take the software features and break them out into individuals, but whatever, you know what I mean. 8, 9, 10 things people don't like, 3 or 4 things they do like, and it's like you're taking stones and you're dropping them onto a scale, and the scale's going blah, 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 and you're like, wow, this must be a bad device because the scale's like this. But we have to remember that all of these stones don't weigh the same thing, right? It all comes down to what you're prioritizing. For me, I can stand potentially like 2, 3, 4, 5 things that I don't love. Like, I don't love the way portrait mode looks on this thing's camera. I think portrait mode's pretty bad. But the aspect ratio, the size, the shape of this device is so important to me and is something that I love so much. I'm going to overlook a whole bunch of stuff for this device, just like I used to be with Surface Duo and Duo 2. Yeah, there were tons of things that weren't great about Duo and Duo 2, but the things I liked about it, I liked so much that it just didn't really matter to me. So that's how we have to think about these things. Each stone is not the same size, it's not the same mass. So at the end of the day, at the end of this video, I hope that there are 2 things that people can take away from this. The first one is that most of the people who bought a Pixel Fold feel pretty good about it. They're somewhere in the middle of that rubric, somewhere between it's pretty good to it's pretty great. Like, they're doing okay with their Pixel Fold. It doesn't seem like that many people bought it and are like, oh my God, this thing is just terrible. I hate this device. So that's thing 1 to take away. Thing number 2 to take away is that, and all of us are guilty of this, we all need to do better on this kind of thing, is that we have to try to read these sorts of conversations online a certain way. We have to sort of filter things a certain way with the understanding that the conversations can often tinge much more negative than the actual situation is. We have this evolutionary bias towards negativity. It is a well-documented thing. We are just hardwired to pay more attention to negative things than we are positive things. This is not my opinion. This is a neurological fact. So just something to think about. Hopefully this was interesting, bits of data and conversation for you guys to enjoy today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for voting on the poll if you did so. And if you left a comment, an extra thanks for that, because that helps add to this data set a little bit more and it helps create this conversation. So again, thanks for watching. Subscribe so you don't miss out on more content like this, guys. I'll see you on the next one. And until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.